Hello and welcome to another brilliant episode of the Main Straight, the official F1 in Schools podcast. I'm your host, Tom Deacon. I'm going to welcome you back, and to everyone new to this podcast, this is all about the fantastic F1 in Schools competition, which is a massive STEM project. And on this podcast, we like to get brilliant guests on to help us understand a little bit more about the competition that might help you in your F1 in Schools journey. So we've had some brilliant episodes already, and this is the point where I say to you, please, if you have enjoyed what we've been producing and giving to you, then please take the time to like, subscribe, and follow us. And just think, we'll be able to get even better guests in our long career on this podcast and show. So please do that. Only takes a second, and it will really help me and the team out. So what is on today's episode? Very good question. Well, as you may or may not know, in February, the new technical regulations were released for the Aramco F1 in Schools 2024 World Finals. And on today's show, we're joined by two fabulous guests, one of which is Gary Anderson, the chair of judges at F1 in Schools and former Jordan and Jaguar F1 technical director. We're also joined by a world finalist and competitor in the 2022-2023 season, and he's definitely F1 in Schools alumni. It's Javier Gladstone Contioso. So he's going to be joining, so's Gary, and we're really going to break down what you can expect in these regulations and hopefully find some tips that will help you in your journey. So what are we waiting for? Let's welcome the guys. Okay, well, it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Gary Anderson and Javier to the podcast today. Gary, how are you doing? You're fresh back from F1 testing in Bahrain. Did it all go smoothly?
Yeah, I'm doing good. It did go smoothly, to be honest. I have to say, other than two drain covers coming up on 2 different days. Well, same drain cover, I think it was, came up 2 different days with stop testing for a while. The cars ran faultlessly, so it shows that the cars are more reliable than the track, I suppose you might call it. But yeah, it's the same bunch at the front, which is good and bad. I suppose we're looking at, Red Bull, Ferrari, Mercedes, followed probably pretty closely with McLaren and Aston Martin. So it's not going to be much different from last year because the cars really haven't changed dramatically. Most teams have taken the Red Bull design philosophy from 2023 and sort of you moved their car towards that a bit, I suppose you might call it. But it'll be interesting to see because testing is just testing. Everybody's there doing the miles, just trying to make sure the cars are reliable, experimenting with setups. So it's going to be this weekend, first race of the year, and we won't know much until that happens, really, because people are very good at hiding their true performance in testing.
Yeah, and Javier, fresh from the World Finals in Singapore, the 2022-2023 season, I'm sure there was a lot of testing going on to get ready for that, right?
Yeah, so much testing. I mean, I was on a gap year and I was devoting all my time to developing our car. And yeah, testing was the main bit of our development. Of course it was. So yeah, definitely.
Okay, not as stressful though. Would it have been good fun to have Gary Anderson monitoring your testing situation?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's up to Gary's judgment as well. I think obviously with Gary's expertise, I'm sure we would have done probably a much better job. But no, yeah. So having someone like that as a mentor would always be invaluable.
Well, listen, gentlemen, an absolute pleasure to have you on board for this episode today, where we're really going to dive in to those what can be quite daunting regulations. The new ones for the Aramco F1 in Schools 2024 World Finals have just been released. So, Gary, moving away from the real life world of F1 for a second, can you give us the highlights on these new regulations and what's changed for the teams competing at this year's event?
Well, I think this year's event is more about dotting the I's and crossing the T's. Every time you change the regulations, you learn something new. Last year was the big change. We wanted to drive the cars towards, more of a visual F1 package because we are involved with Formula One. So it's important that we keep that visual image there. So the halo was invented, but it was mainly invented obviously for driver safety in Formula One. But for us, it was about the deceleration zone, having the halo deceleration. We could combine those two together there because we get a lot of damage on the cars from the deceleration system at the end of the track. And that's no fault really of the cars. They're built to the regulations. it's not easy to achieve the weight limit of 50 grams without the car being a little bit fragile. And up till last year, we were stopping the car in tiles or in the brushes, and we were suffering some damage. So we wanted to do something to stop that, which means that the program can run a bit more seamlessly without the delays. And I think it worked very well. But incorporating that as well, we also changed, as I say, for last year, quite a lot of the specification of the car to allow multi-element wings, etc., etc. Now, whenever I say, the car are 50 grams, that's the minimum weight. And it's not easy to achieve. It's a challenge for the guys doing it. So, but it's fairly black and white. You want the car as light as possible. But the emphasis we put onto last year's cars was the fact of aerodynamics becoming more important, drag efficiency becoming more important, because the weight's just the weight. The wheel bearings assembly has been around for years, so that there is good and bad. But the aerodynamic performance is now the moving factor. So the testing that Abby is talking about, it's all going to be about minimum drag, because the cars do suffer from that. They're motoring along merrily down that track. So drag is important. So again, as I said, last year we learned a lot because of a lot of changes. The teams adapted to it absolutely fantastically. So this year was just about recognizing the areas that were a little bit dubious as far as understanding and I was concerned, trying to remove some of the grey areas that we could get into conflict with at the track, and making sure that the regulations were adhered to easier. So, as I say, no massive changes, but you still have to read them a couple of times. As I say, with the regulations, don't think you understand them from reading through them once. You don't. Read them through and read them through again, and until you can actually sort of visualize the regulations without looking at the paperwork, you don't understand them. So be careful. There are changes in there that will be surprises, I suppose you might call it, but there's no massive concept change.
Okay. In real life F1, there was 178 pages of technical regulation changes. How many do the students have to get through to understand? How many pages, so they can visualize it and so they know it inside out, Gary?
Well, it's all part of everything's interrelated with everything else. So it's not one page that makes a difference. It's about making sure you read the whole thing, because everything does affect something else. So I think, I don't know what it is, I think it's 78 pages or something of our regulations, but some of them are in definitions and appendices and whatever. So they're not all technical regulations. But the thing is, was that you just got to be careful, because everybody starts with the same amount of points, and you can only lose from there. So the less you lose, the more successful you are. That's the problem. In Formula One, as we know it, you start with no points and you build them, but we go the other way around. We start with lots of points and you end up losing. So it's your responsibility in reality to not lose. And in effect, it's just a discipline that you have to adhere to, and make sure you read them, understand them, and comply with them. The regulations are there and written, and it's about making sure that you take them in and you build your car to sit down.
Well, there's some great advice there. Javier, you were in the World Finals last year. You had to deal with this new halo and driver of your car, and the fact that, as Gary's already mentioned, the weight, the aerodynamics coming into it. How did you find that process, and did you do that? Did you visualize every rule that you knew? You'd read it through comprehensively?
Yeah, it's a great question. And something we did as a team, Eclipse, for many, many years, it was when we'd get a new set of regulations, we would run, you could do this online, we'd run a PDF, comparator, or like just a system that basically compares both PDFs, and you can see every little change in the document. The only thing to be careful of is you do need to still read the new regulations fully through, playing on your computer or print them out and circle them is something we did. Just to make sure you're really not missing anything. In terms of working with the overhaul of the technical regulations last year, I think Gary's right. It definitely was about the aerodynamics. It was about the mass of the car. Personally, we did struggle, and I'm really excited to see how this new cohort can look at the cars from the last World Finals and improve on some of the mistakes and improve on some of the innovations they might have seen. I'm really excited for them.
it sounds like a fascinating process that your team Eclipse did there, Javier. When you got those new regulations, did it seem like a nasty surprise? Was there a smile? Was there a panic on your face? Was there right, we've just got to tackle this in the best way that we can? Because you mentioned that it wasn't as successful as you would have liked it to have been. So maybe where was that stumbling block?
Yeah, so it's a very funny story actually. I myself, Tom and Evie, who are on my team, had sort of envisioned that maybe the regulations would continue to sort of the trajectory was going to one point, and there wouldn't be a massive overhaul. So I was on a walk. I remember I get a call from Tom, my teammate, and I never heard him panic more. We couldn't believe what they were, and after that sunk in, it was actually really exciting because it was something we weren't expecting, so we could invest time in having a clean slate and starting new. The issue we fell on with the mass was definitely one that I think is definitely solvable. There were a lot of teams at the World Finals with cars that are bang on at 50 grams, the minimum mass for the professional class. It's definitely possible. And of course, like everything, you're bound to make mistakes sometimes.
Gary, you were the F1 technical director at Jaguar and Jordan in your career. Do you relate to when Javier said that, when you get those new regulations, was it kind of the phone calls that have to be made to sort of problem solve quickly and efficiently? Were there moments like that?
Yes. I mean, it's massive, some of the changes that went through in Formula One. From wide track cars to narrow track cars to groove tires, all those changes are very, very demanding on the design of the car. And, most of them point towards getting the best aerodynamic package, to be honest. Aerodynamics in Formula One are the ruling risk. Weight is a given thing. As Javier says, we wouldn't set you a challenge of a car that you can't build down to the minimum weight limit, because we experiment ourselves to see where we get to. So we know that it's possible to build a car down to 50 grams. It's just a case of making it light in the right places, I suppose you might call it, not the wrong places, which means it falls apart. So it is all achievable, but it does mean that aerodynamics is one of those things we have to research. And again, with Formula One, it happens every year. You just keep your research going, and you try to get in Formula One, you try to get more downforce for less drag. Try and get the car more efficient. And F1 and skills, the downforce is not so important, but the drag is important. So it means you have to research that as opposed to just making it happen. You can get the car down to the weight limit by just removing material, but you can't make the car good aerodynamically by just removing material. So it's a different mechanism. But this is what we try to do. This is a learning curve for the future for everybody. Future's a tough world when you get out there and start working with someone. But you have to respond to the situation. So by doing the regulation changes, you're having to respond to a situation and look at it from a different angle. And that's we love the challenge that we set the students, because if you do an exam at college, many people can end up getting the same results. But in F1 and skills, I'm sorry, but that doesn't happen. You end up with a winner and a loser. And unfortunately in life, when you get out into it, it is about winners and losers. Everybody tries hard. Everybody tries to do it. And the losers are not failing. They are not doing it just as well as the winners. So you have to just make sure you do it the best you can. Try to get the best out of it and use it as a major learning curve for your future life.
An invaluable point there made, Gary. I'm curious to know then, because people will be listening now thinking, right, okay, I've taken on board, I'm going to read those regulations thoroughly. I understand from Javier's point, it becomes eventually, maybe quickly, or it takes a longer time to be excited about this challenge. What processes did you use, Gary? Because it's very easy to create, it's actually really difficult to create habit, but you've had years of experience. What are those processes to kind of, maybe as a tip for people of how to just tackle these problems in a more coherent way, I guess?
I think you have to go into it with an open mind. You can't go into it with a vision that you sort of see before you even really understand the regulations. You need to start with an open mind, open to all opportunities, of research and development. And I say about Formula One, one of the things about Formula One is that no team knows 100% what makes a car go quick. You know, the ones that are winning know more about it than others, a higher percentage, but still, you know, Red Bull dominated last year, but they themselves would say, you know, we probably know 90% of what makes the car go quick. So we've still got a 10% opportunity there, whereas somebody down at the back of Formula One might know 50% what makes the car go quick. So they've got a bigger opportunity. So, you know, no matter what team you are, you can improve, you can do better. And that's always the way you have to look at it. But you have to look at it with a very open mind and make sure that you just take everything in, visualize what you're trying to build. Because it's important that you can see it. As a technical person, you know, I used to always be very surprised whenever the car would sit on the ground for the first time. You know, Eddie Jordan, for example, would always come to me and say, oh, doesn't it look nice, you know? And I'd say, yeah, but I've been looking at it for the last 6 months. You know, it hasn't been there. This vision has been there, what you're trying to build. And that's important because that vision is what makes you realize that you can actually see how to make it better while it's being made. So, you know, get a print in your mind of what you're trying to achieve. And then in your mind every day, you'll be sort of making it better. You'll be dotting the I's and crossing the T's on a lot of areas. Even just how you mount stuff on the car, you know, how you mount it efficiently. Don't have extra bits on the car just for the sake of it. You're not, as Colin Chapman, the guy used to own Lotus, used to say, there's nothing as light as not having a certain component on the car. So, you know, you just have to make sure you limit everything, get the weight down, and as I say, make it aerodynamically efficient.
That kind of reminds me of Williams in F1 from last year to this year, having to get that car weight down as best they can. Javier, you just heard some lessons from Gary. I could see you nodding. Now, everyone listening on the podcast won't be able to see you nodding away, but those life lessons he talks about, you know, it's not an exam. You don't get there's winners and losers. What have you taken from the process of F1 in schools, and how important was that communication with your team, and how you got through to get to that world final?
Yeah, I mean, I always say this, but it was absolutely life-changing. I think the biggest thing I took away in an engineering sense was designing to a brief and developing that skill at a young age. I don't think at the time I realised was so important. I've already noticed at university, you know, most of the coursework I have is the same thing. You get a brief and you have to design to that brief. You have to make sure you comply, and that's how you access all those top marks. And for F1 in school, that's points that can win you a world championship and completely change the trajectory of your entire life. So yeah, I'd say it's been absolutely invaluable in not just in engineering sense, but in life as well. I've developed so much communication, as you said, Tom, and confidence as well, speaking to whether that's business partners, members of the public. I couldn't recommend doing it more.
Strong enforcement of how good F1 in schools is. I like that, Javier. When Gary mentioned about having a vision and keep chipping away at that and coming back to it and thinking new ideas, how important is that communication in your team to get this regulation, to get your car, you know, set and get as maximum amount of points in the technical regulations?
Yeah, I think, you know, communication is the number one single determinant of how successful you are as a team, in my opinion. So, you know, for me with Eclipse, there was 3 of us. We were a small team, so I suppose that did make it quite easy. We had a very fast turnaround on ideas, you know, scheduling meetings, because we didn't have to go through 6 people. But then again, on the other hand, you know, there's 3 of you, so you've got to do twice the work of a 6-person team. So yeah, I would completely agree with you. I think communication was the most important factor. And, you know, we did stuff like, you know, we've become friends for life now. We went out, we did escape rooms, we'd go out for lunch sometimes after meetings. So I think it's really important to have a close bond with your teammates. And I don't know if Gary would agree with what it was like in Formula One, but for us, yeah, it was really important.
Were there escape rooms, Gary, in the world of F1 after meetings?
I tried to escape quite a few times, never succeeded. But yeah, I mean, whenever we started with the Jordan back in, you know, it's a long time ago now, 1990 to design it, there was 3 of us as well. So communication was very, very easy. Now, you know, that same team, which is called Aston Martin, I was up at their factory not so long ago, just having a look around it. And they've got 250 seats in the drawing office. It's race engineers and designers. So communications becomes such a big part. And now there's a team of people making sure communication works. There's a team of people that set up meetings between certain groups to make sure the communication is there. But that's how it's evolved. And Navi is right. That makes such an important thing. I remember years ago, guys at McLaren telling me that one aero group had designed a new floor, and the other aero group had designed a new engine cover cum side pod. And whenever both of them got ready to go on the track, they hadn't communicated and they didn't actually fit together. Never mind work together, but they didn't actually fit together. So it just shows you that you can, even you're a big company like McLaren were then, you still can, screw up quite quickly. So communication, everything must be, put in a way that everybody gets access to it, somehow or another, and make sure that you understand it, because at least little things can just really, really upset the apple cart as far as how you do stuff. So yeah, communication is a massive part of it. And, that carries on into life, not just about F1 and schools. That is something for the future for everybody. You have to communicate.
I'm curious, but before we sort of begin to wrap up the podcast for today, I'm curious to know. So a team sets out, they've got the regulations, they build the car, or they begin that process, design, development. At what point can they decide they've gone down the wrong route, Gary and Javier? Is that an important factor in this competition where they go, we have to communicate to say we could make this even better? Is that a constant process, and to keep going back to those regulations?
Well, you have to keep on recognizing what you're trying to do. I mean, that's what testing should show you. You've got your last year's car, and so you got a measure, I suppose you might call it. The objective is to go faster down the track. It's also about all the other regulations, the portfolios, the meetings, the verbal presentations, all that stuff that comes into it in F1 and schools. And you've got to do all of those a little bit better every time. So you know what you've had in the past. You know where you scored points at, and you know how to try to, you have to make it better. So car-wise, that's the difficult decision, because if you have a concept, and we've seen it, let's say Formula One for the last couple of years, the Red Bull concept was very good, dominated. The Mercedes concept wasn't. They were still competitive, but they weren't their usual, race winners. And they never really cottoned on to the fact that they weren't looking at the right things. Whenever a technical director sits down with a Formula One team before the design of a new car, what they do is write down a specification for it. What efficiency figures they're looking for, how the aerodynamics work, center pressure shift, all of that stuff. And in Formula One, it's obviously very, very involved. You're looking at aerodynamic characteristics with steering lock. It just goes on and on forever. In F1 and schools, it's obviously a bit different from that. But you still need to set yourself an objective and try to achieve that objective, which is, if you have the facilities of a test track, then test and try to do as much as you can to go faster. And if your concept isn't right, normally the concept would focus on the fact of getting it down to the 50 grams, but you've also got to make sure aerodynamically you do some CFD research if you can do it, and just make sure you try to get the car as efficient as possible. But as with anything, we're sitting here with the Formula One season starting racing next week, and in reality, we don't know who's going to win. We probably do, but actually we don't. And the teams, this is the time whenever you're biting your nails. That week just before the first race, you've done your testing, you know where you stand, but you don't know where anybody else stands. And that's the same for F1 and schools. You can do the best job you can in your car, you arrive at the track, but it's down to the others, It's all relative. You've only got to beat everybody else. It doesn't matter whether the time is 1 second or 1.1 seconds. As long as everybody else is slower, then you'll be okay. So it's the same challenge. The others control your future.
Javier, what was it like then? You got to Singapore with the new regulations that we are in this episode talking about. Have had a little bit of a shift, dotting the I's, crossing the T's. What was it like? You get into that massive room, conference room, everyone's set up their displays, and you start to look at everyone else's designs and concepts. And was there a gulp feeling, or did you feel kind of confident, like Gary says?
Yeah, I think an attitude we brought to the competition was that we were proud of what we did. We definitely, thought before we came to the competition, we've done our best. So we're going to go we're going to go to Singapore, we're going to enjoy it, but we're also going to learn from other teams and see what they've done. So, walking down around the pit displays once they've been put up, talking to the engineers of the team or why they'd made the decisions for their car development they did was, hugely inspirational, just because everyone did something so different because of the overhaul of the technical regulations. And, we looked and we thought, they've done that right, we've got that wrong, we think we might have done that right. It's just so interesting to see how people have made that split advantage where they're getting ahead on track. And so, it was really, really exciting at the time.
Oh, well, listen, congratulations again on making it to the World Final. As we wrap things up then, gentlemen, thank you so much for being on the show today. Final tips and maybe what you're looking forward to in the Aramco F1 in Schools 2024 World Finals, Gary, from you. And I'll ask the same for Javier. Final tips before we wrap things up.
Well, it's the same as I started it with, really. Read the regulations. We've had a big update last year, so obviously caught everyone by surprise. We ourselves, need to dot the I's and cross the T's on them to sort of make sure we cover the areas that we thought were questionable. We've done that this year, and that's really what it should be about. We like to change the regulations because we like to set a new challenge as the new teams or the new students come through, engineers and everybody in the teams, as they come through. There's no point in just copying what last year's car was like. We like to sort of every 2 to 3 years probably change them enough so you have to scratch your head again, because that's important, I think. Otherwise you just get into this ritual. We monitor plagiarism very tightly and all the portfolios, etc., all the submissions, but that's very difficult to do with cars. So the regulations are a thing that control that. So this is why we keep on trying to introduce a new challenge. Not that it's going to be massively different, but it has to be looked at in a different way. And that's the same thing, as I say, for 2024, the regulations haven't changed dramatically, but they've changed subtly. So just make sure you take in those little subtle changes because they can affect you.
Well, I'm looking forward to seeing you at the World Finals, and I can confirm that you are going to be there with that smile. So I look forward to that. And Javier, final tips for anyone listening to maybe emulate or get to the position you were in your F1 in Schools journey?
Yeah, I'd enforce what Gary said as well. I think from an outside perspective, now I'm judging the competition. I really do think teams that nail their car design are also ones that get 100% compliance on the regulations, just because they're maximising those available points for the rest of the competition. But in terms of a final tip, I'd say if you play to your strengths, you work hard, and you listen to those around you, you really will enjoy the journey. So yeah, just do your best and never stop dreaming in the competition is my advice.
Oh, well, gentlemen, I look forward to having both of you judges there at the World Finals, and maybe just throw in a little tip, maybe a little escape room will help team bonding a little bit. Gentlemen, an absolute pleasure. And thank you very much to everybody listening today. If you have enjoyed this podcast, then make sure you listen back to previous episodes, like and subscribe. That really helps the whole team. So thank you very much. We'll catch you next time.